The 404 Victim, a Miss Marple mystery. Hi there, welcome back to Haunting Vales. Tonight's mystery begins with a number, 404, a house at the far edge of the village, long avoided by its neighbors, its windows dark and its door rarely opened. To most, it was simply another old address, but to Miss Marple, the silence surrounding it feels far too deliberate. When a body is discovered inside, the villagers are quick to claim they saw nothing, heard nothing, and knew nothing. Yet the room tells a different story. A chair overturned, a letter half burned in the fireplace, and a clock stopped at an exact, unsettling time. Miss Marple notices what everyone else ignores, the victim's strange connection to the house and the curious fact that someone wanted both the person and the truth to disappear. Because in St. Mary Mead, some addresses are remembered not for who lived there, but for what happened inside. Before we uncover the truth behind the 404 Victim, don't forget to subscribe for more haunting Miss Marple mysteries on Haunting Vales. Chapter 1. The House at Number 404. Rain had been falling over St. Mary Mead since late afternoon, the sort of steady, cold rain that soaked into the roads and turned the gardens dark and shining under the lamps. By evening, the village had folded itself into silence, curtains drawn, doors locked, fires lit, the ordinary little rituals of ordinary little lives. But Miss Marple had often said that wicked things liked ordinary places best. They could hide there, blend in, wait. Willow Lane sat at the far edge of the village, narrow and crooked like an old scar, lined with houses that leaned slightly with age, as though listening to one another. Number 404 stood apart from the rest, not larger, not grander, just colder somehow. The sort of house that looked as if laughter had not crossed its doorway in years. It belonged to Mr. Edwin Pritchard, retired solicitor, aged 61, a man known for habits so exact they might have been set by railway time. Breakfast at 7, a walk at 8, tea at 4, gate locked at 9. Every day, every week, every year. Villagers trusted his routine the way sailors trust the stars. Edwin Pritchard was predictable, sharp, quiet, a man who spoke little but noticed much. And that was the thing about people who noticed too much. They often saw what they shouldn't. That Tuesday evening, just after 8:30, Mrs. Lydia Barlow from next door spotted him through her window. Edwin was standing by his study lamp, staring at something in his hand, not reading it, just staring, still as stone. She thought it odd, not because he was awake, Edwin often worked late, but because he looked frightened. Later, she'd tell Inspector Cray that it was the face of a man who'd seen death before it reached him. At 9 o'clock, the village clock struck, one bell after another, slow and heavy in the wet dark, and Edwin Pritchard locked his gate. At least that's what everyone assumed, because by morning the gate was standing open, wide open. Mrs. Barlow noticed it while collecting her milk bottle. She frowned at once. Edwin's gate open at dawn was like finding the church doors unlocked at midnight. Wrong. Plain wrong. She knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Nothing. By 11, the milk still sat untouched. The post had not been collected. And by noon, Mrs. Barlow, with growing nerves and a dreadful feeling pressing at her ribs, fetched Dr. Haynes from the High Street. Together they entered. The house smelled of old books and cold ash. Quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that made the floorboards sound louder than they should. The front room was untouched, the dining room neat, the kitchen clean. But the study door stood half open. Dr. Haynes pushed it and stopped. Edwin Pritchard was sitting at his desk, his body bent forward awkwardly, cheek resting against polished wood. One arm dangled lifeless beside him, his fingers pale, stiff, dead. No blood, no struggle, nothing broken, just dead. Dr. Haynes stepped closer, his breath catching when he saw Edwin's hand. Clutched tightly in his fist was a torn scrap of paper. 3 figures written in dark pencil. That was all. No note, no explanation, just those numbers. When Inspector Percival Cray arrived, tall and serious, with rain still dripping from his coat, he studied the room carefully. The fire had gone out. The lamp had burned low. Edwin's teacup sat half-finished beside him. Poison, perhaps. That was the first thought. But Dr. Haynes shook his head after a quick examination. No poison smell, no obvious sign of illness. Cray frowned. Then what? The desk itself held more questions than answers. One drawer had been left open, not forced, open. Inside were papers, legal files, letters tied with string. But one thing stood out, a gap, a single missing page from Edwin's diary, torn cleanly. Not by accident. Taken. And someone had wanted it badly enough to kill for it. By late afternoon, the story had spread through St. Mary Mead like wildfire under dry leaves. Edwin Pritchard murdered, found at his desk, holding strange numbers. Miss Marple heard it from her maid while pouring tea, and she paused with the teapot hanging in the air. 404, she said softly. Her maid nodded. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Numbers were curious things. Most people thought them plain, safe, but numbers could carry meaning like words carried secrets. She set down her cup untouched. There was something ugly in it. She could feel it already. That evening, Inspector Cray called on Miss Marple, not officially, just curious. People often came to Miss Marple when things felt wrong in ways they couldn't explain. He handed her the scrap. Any thoughts? Miss Marple studied it. The writing was rushed, pressed hard into the paper. Edwin had written it himself. Cray was sure of that. Was he expecting visitors? She asked. Cray nodded. 1. A man named Arthur Bell, an old client. And where is Arthur Bell? Cray's mouth tightened. Gone. Miss Marple gave a tiny hum. Gone. That was interesting. She turned the paper over. Blank. But the tear at the edge caught her eye. Not torn from a notebook, from a letter. That changed everything. Because Edwin hadn't written a message, he had copied it. And if he copied it moments before dying, it meant the numbers mattered a great deal. That night, Miss Marple sat by her fire, knitting untouched in her lap, her mind moving through the little details like fingers through beads. An open gate, a frightened face, a missing diary page, a vanished visitor, and 3 strange numbers. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the village lay under deep black sky. Still, watching, waiting. And somewhere, Miss Marple was certain, someone else was awake too. Someone nervous, someone wondering whether Edwin Pritchard had managed to tell his secret
before he died, because murder had entered St. Mary Mead, quietly, cleverly. And if Miss Marple was right, Edwin Pritchard had not been the first name on that hidden list, just the first to die.
Chapter 2. The Missing Page. The next morning, St. Mary Mead woke under a pale sky, washed clean by rain, but not by peace. Murder, even a quiet sort of murder, leaves a mark on a village. People spoke in softer voices, doors stayed shut longer, faces at windows vanished the moment they were noticed. Edwin Pritchard's death had settled over the village like dust over furniture, thin but impossible to ignore. A man like Edwin did not simply die at his desk, clutching strange numbers, unless something had driven him there. Miss Marple arrived at number 404 just after 10, her umbrella tucked beneath one arm, though the weather had turned dry. Inspector Cray was waiting at the gate, looking as though sleep had escaped him. He gave her the sort of look policemen give when facts are piling up, but sense is not. "Dr. Haynes has finished his report," he said as they walked inside. "Cause of death, heart failure." Miss Marple stopped for half a second. Heart failure. Such plain words for such an ugly business. "Natural?" she asked. Cray shook his head. "Not exactly. His heart stopped, yes, but the doctor says it was brought on by shock, severe shock." Miss Marple gave a small nod. That sounded far more like it. Edwin Pritchard was not the sort of man to frighten easily. The study looked exactly as it had the day before. The lamp still sat low over the desk. The teacup remained beside the papers. The chair sat pushed back just slightly, as though Edwin had shifted suddenly before death took him. Miss Marple stood in the doorway for a long moment, saying nothing, simply letting the room speak to her in its own way. Inspector Cray watched her, a little impatient, but he had learned that Miss Marple saw things by standing still that others missed by moving too much. The diary lay open on the desk. Tuesday's entry was short, very short. Visitor at 9:30. 4 simple words, but the next page had been torn out, neatly removed, not ripped in anger, but taken with care. Miss Marple touched the edge of the paper with one finger, smooth enough, controlled. Whoever had removed it had time and calm. That told her something important. Panic makes a mess. Calmness means purpose. Inspector Cray explained that Arthur Bell, Edwin's expected visitor, had disappeared. His cottage was empty, his suitcase gone. The train station master remembered seeing him near dawn. That made Bell look guilty. It always does when someone runs. But Miss Marple had known many frightened people in her life, and fear often looked exactly like guilt to those who didn't know better. Arthur Bell was a nervous man by nature, the kind who jumped at shadows and apologized to furniture after bumping into it, not the sort one pictures sitting calmly after a killing. Her eyes moved across the room, slow and sharp, until she noticed the drawer in Edwin's desk standing half open. Inside were bundles of letters tied in string, legal papers, old receipts. But there was an empty space, a clear gap where something had been. What was kept there, she asked. Cray checked his notes. Letters, mostly. Miss Marple glanced at the scrap of paper Edwin had died holding. 404. It wasn't written like a message. It was copied. She felt it sure of it now. Edwin had seen those numbers somewhere, likely in a letter, and written them down quickly before he died. Then she noticed something else, a tea stain on the carpet beside the desk, just a few drops, dark against the wool. Edwin's cup sat on the right side of the desk, but the stain was on the left. Miss Marple bent down, studying it carefully. Edwin was right-handed. Everyone knew that, which meant he would not have spilled tea there.
Someone else had sat opposite him. Someone else had been drinking tea, talking quietly, calmly, until something happened, something bad enough to stop Edwin's heart. That afternoon, Miss Marple walked to the post office. Small places keep big secrets, and post offices hear everything without meaning to. Miss Finch, the postmistress, remembered Edwin collecting a letter the morning before he died. Brown envelope, thick paper, untidy writing in pencil. Miss Marple felt the pieces shifting. Pencil, just like the numbers on the scrap. That letter mattered. It had started all of this. Back home by the fire, she laid the facts out in her mind. A letter arrives. Edwin reads it. He copies the number 404. Arthur Bell visits that night. They share tea. A diary page goes missing. Edwin dies of shock. Arthur Bell runs. It looked simple on the surface, too simple, which meant the truth was deeper. By evening, Inspector Cray returned, carrying something wrapped carefully in paper. Arthur Bell had been found at the railway station, trying to leave for London, pale, shaking, frightened out of his senses. In his pocket was the missing diary page. Cray laid it on Miss Marple's table and unfolded it. There, in Edwin's neat hand, was one sentence. "If anything happens to me, ask about Helen." Miss Marple stared at the name. Helen. No Helen in Edwin's life. No sister, no wife, no servant, no friend, nothing. And that was the worst part. Because if Helen wasn't a woman, then it was something else. A place, a code, a secret. And Arthur Bell, locked now in the village station cell, swore over and over that he didn't kill Edwin Pritchard. Miss Marple believed him, not because she trusted him, but because fear has a smell to it, and Arthur Bell smelled of fear, not guilt. Which left one cold thought sitting in the middle of everything. If Arthur Bell didn't kill Edwin Pritchard, then someone else had sat in that room, someone who knew about the letter, someone who knew about Helen, and someone who was still out there, walking free, while the truth stayed hidden in a missing piece of the past.
Chapter 3. The Dead File at 4:04. That night, Miss Marple did not sleep much. The name Helen sat in her mind like a loose thread in knitting, catching and tugging at everything else. Names were rarely just names in matters like this. People hid truths inside simple things, a word, a number, a date. Edwin Pritchard had known he was in danger. That much was plain now. Men do not write warnings in diaries unless they feel death breathing near them. But why Arthur Bell had taken the page, and why Edwin had copied 404, still sat in the dark. By morning, Miss Marple asked to see Arthur Bell. He was sitting in the village station, pale as candle wax, his hands shaking so badly he could barely lift his tea. He looked less like a killer and more like a man waiting for bad news he already knew was coming. Inspector Cray stood nearby, arms folded, watching closely. Arthur looked at Miss Marple as though she might save him or bury him. "I didn't kill Edwin," he said at once, his voice dry and thin. Miss Marple believed him, not because his words sounded honest, but because his fear sounded real. "Then tell me why you ran," she said. Arthur swallowed hard and rubbed his hands together. "Because he told me to." That caught even Inspector Cray off guard. Arthur explained that Edwin had sent for him that Tuesday afternoon, asking him to come at 9:30 exactly. Edwin had sounded frightened, truly frightened. When Arthur arrived, Edwin showed him a letter, a brown envelope with only 3 numbers inside. 404. Nothing else. Edwin recognized it at once, and that was what terrified him. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. "From where?" Arthur hesitated. "From an old case." That changed the room. Arthur explained that 20 years ago, Edwin handled a private matter for a wealthy widow named Helen Barron. She died suddenly, leaving behind papers Edwin had locked away. But Arthur claimed the widow had not died naturally. Edwin always suspected murder. The proof was hidden in a file, File 404. Miss Marple felt the pieces slide together. Not a house number, not an address, a file, a dead file, and someone had reopened it. Arthur admitted he took the diary page because Edwin told him to. "If anything happens to me," Edwin had said, "don't let them find Helen." Miss Marple sat very still. Not Helen the woman, Helen the file, the evidence, the truth. Inspector Cray wasted no time. They returned to Edwin's house and searched the study from top to bottom. Bookshelves, desk drawers, cabinets, nothing. But Miss Marple noticed something odd. Edwin's fireplace had been cleaned recently, too recently. Edwin was a tidy man, yes, but not tidy enough to clean ashes in the middle of the week. She bent beside the grate. There, caught beneath the iron edge, was a half-burned label. Cray's face tightened. The file had been there, and someone had tried to destroy it, but not all of it. Miss Marple reached into the grate carefully and pulled free a half-burned paper. Just enough survived. A name, a date, a payment record, and one signature. Dr. Haynes. Inspector Cray stared at it. The village doctor, the very man who examined Edwin's body, and suddenly it made dreadful sense. 20 years ago, Haynes was a young assistant doctor. If Mrs. Helen Barron had been poisoned, he would have known. And if Edwin had kept proof all these years, Haynes had every reason to silence him. They found Dr. Haynes at his surgery, packing in haste. Always a bad sign. At first he denied everything, calm, cold, but when Cray placed the burned paper in front of him, his face changed, just for a second. Enough. That was all Miss Marple needed. Haynes had killed Helen Barron for money years ago. Edwin discovered it, but never had enough proof to act. He kept the file hidden, quiet, waiting. But someone had sent Edwin a letter with one message only, a warning, or perhaps a threat. Haynes realized Edwin might finally expose him, so he went to the house that night, sat across from him, drank tea, and told him the truth, that he knew where the file was, that he'd come for it. And when Edwin refused, Haynes showed him something, proof that Helen Barron knew before she died, a confession. Edwin's weak heart gave way under the shock. No knife, no poison, just terror. Haynes burned the file, took the diary page, but Arthur Bell had already hidden it, the loose end that broke the whole thing open. By evening, Dr. Haynes was under arrest, his face gray, his hands still, his clever little lies finished at last. Inspector Cray stood outside the station with Miss Marple, the evening air sharp and cold. "It was all in the numbers," Cray said quietly. Miss Marple smiled faintly. "No, Inspector, it was in the people. Numbers only point. People do the killing." The lamps of St. Mary Mead glowed softly as night settled over the village once more. Quiet again on the outside, although Miss Marple knew quiet places held the darkest things. And as she turned for home, she stopped and looked back at number 404. Such an ordinary house, such ugly secrets. And somewhere, in another drawer, another attic, another forgotten box, there were always more secrets waiting, waiting for someone to pull the thread. And if you followed this mystery to the end, don't look away just yet, because the next secret is never far behind. Subscribe and stay close. In St. Mary Mead, the dead are never quite done talking.